Right now, I could tell you on Monday, January 13th at 1:20 p.m. Eastern Time, Bellator is dead. Bellator, as we know it, is no more. Bellator is dead. You will not see Bellator events anymore. And in fact, if you have looked at Don Davis's social media over the last couple of weeks, he refers to things as all PFL. And if you look at that event on January the 25th, you will see that other than the picture of the belt and other than, in the press release it says Bellator lightweight title, there's no other mention of Bellator. Bellator, as we know it, is dead. From the Bjorn era to the Scott Coker era to the PFLator era, it is no more. And so this is what's going to happen. This is the structure. There are going to be what is being referred to as PFL Champion Series events. Those events are going to be headlined by title fights. PFL is going to start having its own champions, not just season champions, not just tournament champions, its own champion. Now, what is unclear, and I've talked to maybe 5 sources with very intimate knowledge of what is going on, unclear how they will crown those champions. Meaning, does Usman Nurmagomedov become the PFL lightweight champion after January 25th if he beats Paul Hughes, or does Paul Hughes become the PFL lightweight champion, or are the tournament winners from last year the PFL champions? My hunch says, given what they get paid and given how everything is structured, the Bellator champions would then become the PFL champions. And so how they are going to structure it is they're going to have these PFL Champion Series events, which are essentially just cards headlined by champions and filled with other talent throughout, and those will be scattered throughout the year. The PFL season format is no more. What it is now is somewhere in the range of 6 to 8 weight classes being featured, 8 fighters, 2 alternates, single elimination tournament. There's no more standings, there's no more points or anything like that. Single elimination tournament, Grand Prix style, if you will. They're not calling it a Grand Prix. I've heard because that's what Bellator used to call it, and they don't want to call it that. So it'll just be some sort of I think they're calling it like global tournament, global season or something like that. And it'll just be like this guy versus this guy, and you move on to the next. The winner of that tournament, single elimination tournament, gets $500,000. So it's a little bit different than the past. You don't win a belt or anything. You might win some Fakakta belt, but you're not the champion of any sort of division. It's the pot at the end of the rainbow, which is $500,000. Now, interesting to note that this is $500,000 in addition to your purse. In the old days, it wasn't $1 million in addition to your purse. It was your purse subtracted from $1 million. So if you were someone, and most fighters, and different fighters had it structured differently, but some fighters would have it let's say you were someone who made 150 and 150. So it would then be $700,000 that you're winning in the final. And then there were other fighters who had fixed amount, regardless of what they were making for the quarterfinals, semifinals, final, because maybe that would equal more. And so now it's none of that. You just have your contract, and if you win the tournament, you're winning $500,000. What's unclear to me at this time is if you win that, what else do you get? Do you get a shot at the champion? Unclear at this time. That hasn't really been really kind of laid out. But I would imagine that's the whole point of it. You win the pot, and then you become a number one contender. That's how you can build number one contenders. But again, the stuff that we've sort of criticized them for, regular season points, all that is going by the wayside. In addition to that, they'll still have your PFL Europes and your PFL Middle East, Africa, all that stuff, and that will feed up to these tournaments. But it's no longer being structured as regular season and all that, and Bellator is no more. When this first came out about the $1 million to $500,000, it felt like, oh, this is a sign that they're dead. Now, I'm being told that as far as finances are concerned, they're in a good spot. They have great, solid investment, all that stuff and more. They're not hurting for cash. This is just kind of like a restructuring of how the promotion is laid out. I actually think it makes a ton more sense because hopefully now, I hate that they're calling it Champion Series. Their pay-per-views, super fight series, all that stuff is no more. Just have major events and have tournaments. You don't not all of this needs to be broken down. Now, what's unclear also is where this January 25th event is going to air. As of right now, they haven't announced. I have been told that it might just air on YouTube, and they might just say, "Here, we're going to give it to you for free," which in some ways is just like, "Hey, we don't have a deal done, and so we're going to put it on YouTube." Maybe on Max, maybe on Amazon as well. They're in the mix too, and so there's a lot still in flux. There's a lot still at play. But what I said before regarding the format, that's all accurate, and that could be announced as recently as soon as this week. I actually think it's a win for the promotion because I hated the season, I hated the points, I hated the playoff, I hated all of that stuff. Now you can make the biggest fights for the belts, and then if you're punching your ticket for the tournament, then you're going to go that route, and that's maybe a place where you can try to build new stars. So in other words, a Cedric Doumbé, if you want, you could just put him in a title fight as opposed to risking putting him in to a tournament. A Paul Hughes, if you want, put him in a title fight, and you don't have to risk him in the tournament. Here's one thing, and a lot of people have criticized Don Davis in particular and PFL, and some of it has been warranted, and some maybe not. Here's one thing that doesn't get talked about enough. When Bellator was on its last legs, and everyone under the sun knew that it was going to get sold, the old regime, Scott Coker being the head of it, signed a lot of fighters to massive deals, knowing that the end was near. And then basically said, like, the new owners, PFL, are going to have to deal with this as a nice little parting gift. There are several fighters, Gegard Mousasi, one of them, a lot of the big names that you've seen openly complain, who got these massive deals that are worth close to $1 million a fight, that it would be unsustainable for PFL to put those guys in tournaments, and this has been the problem, and it just isn't, it isn't cost effective. Sign them to these deals as a parting gift. Why Don Davis does not say this to explain the situation that he was put in, I have no idea. I don't know who's running the show behind the scenes there. Well, I know who's running the show behind the scenes there from a PR perspective. My point is, you are not speaking up. You are not letting people know the truth. And as a result, they're taking information from the disgruntled fighters, from managers, and they're able to paint their own narrative, which isn't a good one in your favor. And you're just standing back and letting everyone slag you off. Why? Tell the truth. Come out. Do media. Explain your position, explain what you inherited, and explain what you acquired, and explain how you're going to fix it. None of these LinkedIn posts, none of these tweets, none of this stuff. You have to come out. What do people love about Dana White? They love that he was a guy who took no shit from anyone, showed up, ripped jeans, t-shirt, guns blazing, and told it like it is, at least from his perspective. And people love that, and they ate it up. Don takes the business investor approach and says, we're gonna do things slowly but surely. We're going to do things the right way. And look, everyone has their own approach to business. In the fight game, I don't think that's the right approach. Someone talks shit about you, you have to respond. You have to respond, especially when you've been dealt a bad hand. And in large part, they were dealt a bad hand because they got a lot of these contracts that just weren't worth it. Love some of those guys, but in 2025, they are not worth that amount. And so they're making these changes. What are they going to do with those guys? Are they going to offer pay cuts? Are they going to say you could go this route and you could win this pot at the end and that could be you making up the money? That all is a work in progress. Remains to be seen. They've got this event on the 25th. New season starts a couple of, or not new season, like they pick back up. It's going to take a while to change that verbiage in our brain. A couple months later, they've got a big rights deal coming up. And there's a lot in flux. But right now, they're not hurting for cash. They're not 6 feet or 4 feet under, but I think they have recognized that the format doesn't work. The $1 million payout thing didn't work. The season format doesn't work, and they're trying to make changes. And so that's the story as far as PFL and Bellator is concerned. But ding dong, the witch is dead. Bellator, as we know it, I was going to say PFLator. It was all very confusing. Is done. There's not going to be any Bellator shows. I've also been told that these plans have changed a gazillion times, and that's why I kind of sat on this for several days. But that feels quite certain at this juncture. Gents, what do you think of this? What do you think of this information? Good for Bellator? Good for PFL? Good for the fighters? Good for everyone involved? Or
yes,
no?
Good for Bellator.
Yeah, well, Bellator.
Hard to say.
Not good for Bellator.
Yeah,
good for everyone involved.
I was going to say hard to say if good for Bellator and the fighters, but good for long-term health of the brand. Like, no, there's no secret here. Everybody has been saying they need to just have one roster, combine the things, get rid of the tournament. Like, moving forward, that should create better outcomes for them. Now, what does that mean in terms of like number of fights? We already see Bellator fighters saying I didn't fight enough, and big names, and the biggest names on the PFL roster are unhappy right now, and so that's a big problem. But hopefully, if they can streamline what the actual product is, it would stand to reason that yes, this can be good long term as long as they can provide the fights for these athletes. I don't have a problem with the reduction of the tournament purse. Like you, I thought it was kind of like insignificant in the grander scheme. Like, it is great for those individual athletes, but outside of that, it does not do much for the brand. And so I would even have been in favor of scrapping the prizes altogether and getting rid of the tournament in any, like, it sounds like it's shifting in format. I'd get rid of it all and just have the best fights, the best fight the best. We've heard you fans, Don Davis, to get up there one day and just be like, we heard you fans. You want to see Patchy Mix versus this person? That's what we're going to do. No more tournaments, no more checks at the end. Everybody's getting paid, everybody's fighting, and proceed from there. So there may be some short-term implications and problems, and I don't imagine this is going to be super smooth as it transitions, but long-term, I like this much better.
Pizzi?
Yeah, I think something had to give. They had to change something. Like, pretending that everything was fine. You always reference that meme with the dog sitting in the place on fire. Like, that's what it felt like we were dealing with PFL for the last, say, 3-4 months of 2024. Something has to give. They have to try something new. I would like, as you and Rick both referred to, like a very direct message from PFL to the fan base. I think they've lost a lot of integrity with, particularly the US fan base. So they need to do something. I think the tournament bracket without the point system, and the kind of Champions League knockout stage kind of thing, I like that. I think some of the point system was kind of used as like a pun within the community, the quick six, all this kind of stuff. It never caught on. We all understand wins and losses. We all understand moving through a bracket like that. I think that will be better. I do think there is a serious issue with the halving of the tournament purse, not from the consumer's point of view, but from the athlete's point of view. As I said last week, this is why they are getting Dakota Chicheva to sign with the PFL. This is why they're getting Paul Hughes to sign with the PFL. Taking that carrot to dangle away from them, I think will hurt them in terms of signing talent going forward. What
do you think, Connor?
Yeah, I mean, me and Rick talked last week as soon as they made the cut to the 500,000, and as we were discussing it, Rick made the point of just like, this is just a bad look, but I hope the reason that they're doing this is that they're going to expand elsewhere beyond, or maybe they're just hopefully getting rid of the tournament period. Obviously, they're not doing that. But to see that they are making action, they're trying to make improvements. It feels like they're listening to the fans a little bit. I feel like people have been banging the drum to get rid of Bellator period for a while now, since the merger happened. So I think it's good for all involved. It feels like they're trying to make changes, to make improvements to the organization. So we have to see what happens, but I feel like this is a step in the right direction.
So back in December, Don Davis tweeted, these are the start dates for the PFL MMA 2025 year ahead. He called it the PFL Global Season March, PFL Champion Series April, and then PFL Europe, PFL Mideast, PFL Africa. That was the indication in many respects as to the end of Bellator as we know it. Now, he also mentions 30 events, 320 fights. Okay, we'll see what the breakdown is and all that. But around, I think it was last Monday, they tweeted that the elbows were going to be allowed for all the events. That was another indication that the tournament format was going away because they needed to get rid of elbows so that you can continue in the season to get to the playoffs. If you had to pull out due to a cut, now it screws everything up because you have standings, right? Like if someone has 6 points and now they're out because of a cut, what happens to that person? Well, now if you can't continue, you can't continue. That's just, and if you're getting cut open, you may be getting cut open in a loss. Maybe. I know Roman Kopylov different on Saturday, but point is, you just have to deal with it. And then if you can't continue, you can't continue. I think it's ultimately, from a fan standpoint, a net positive. I wish they would just get rid of the global season champion series nonsense. But from a product standpoint, I think it's easier to follow. Essentially, it's what the old Bellator was, like towards the end, where it's just you have champions and then you'll have, in the old days, you had one Grand Prix a year, it seemed. Now you're going to have a lot more. But this, to me, makes a lot more sense than having, the standings and all that. Now, I wish they would take it a step further and get rid of the uniforms and allow fighters to have sponsors. Really make it fun. Be the place where fighters can be like themselves. But I understand, Pete, exactly what you're saying. This was always the great differentiator, especially for someone, all right, a Kayla Harrison, a Dakota, a Paul Hughes. You aren't a UFC cast-off. Maybe the plan is, hey, let me go make a couple of bucks, and then I'll jump over. But now you have to look at it and be like, all right, am I going to go through this tournament just to get 500, or is there a better deal waiting for me in 2-3 fights from the UFC? We'll see. So again, as I said, like for the fighters, it may not be better, may not, but I think for the fans and for us who are just jonesing for a competitor to the UFC, or not even a competitor at this point because the gap has never been bigger, if we're being honest, just someone that can offer something, an AEW to the UFC's WWE, at least this feels a lot more like a regular promotion as opposed to one with a gimmick attached to it.
Yeah, they over-egg the omelet to some extent, Ariel, with all this branding you're referring to. There was just so much, and this fighter belongs to this part of it, and I still think that's a problem to some extent. The various tributaries that come off of PFL, I think. Even when I was reading Drake's article on the show last Friday, I can remember reading through it, and Drake has done a great job, lays it all out there. But as I'm hearing the words come out of my mouth, I'm like, this is so confusing because he's breaking down what champions would get, what this person would get. It's all got a bit lost in the sauce. And I think the beauty of MMA when it first emerged was like, as ridiculous as the selling point is now, 2 guys enter the cage, 1 man leaves. But that's the simplicity of it. That's the brilliance of it. And I just feel like it's got very, very complicated since the merging of Bellator and PFL. But in terms of the tournament prize money, Paul Hughes signs with this promotion last year. I'm going to have 3 fights and then I'm going to go and compete for $1 million in the tournament, was his war cry from the outset. He's obviously got a big fight next week against Usman Nurmagomedov. Either of those guys win that fight, whoever wins, you're going to have to try and convince them to go into this 4 fights in a very short period of time for 500,000. I think that's going to become very difficult. We've already seen Dakota win that money and not feel too excited about competing for it again. We know this is a common thing that happens when people win that $1 million. I think it's about to get a lot more complicated.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's see. I think the plan, honestly, was to announce a vast majority of this information this week. I think they've hinted at that. So let us see how it all shakes out. But there it is. And a bit of a cloud if they don't figure it out before the 25th, which I think they will. Let's see even how we can watch that, because I think there's a tremendous amount of interest attached to Paul Hughes versus Usman Nurmagomedov, especially as it will come a week after UFC 311, where you have Islam Makhachev and Umar Nurmagomedov. I think there'll be a ton of interest there. So let us see.
A lot of pressure too.
Yeah.
Pressure.
Yeah. All right. There's the story as far as PFL and Bellator are concerned. Thanks for watching this video. Hey, before you go, do me a favor, hit that sub button, give us a thumbs up, hit the little bell thingy as well. Leave us a nice comment or 2. We appreciate you all very much.